I'm getting the house and the business. She just gets the dolls. Those words, smugly spoken by my brother in our father's lawyer's office, triggered a shift that no one saw coming. They thought I'd been dismissed, discarded, forgotten. But they were wrong, so very deliciously wrong. Growing up in the Wells household was like living in a play where the roles were set in stone. Sebastian, my older brother by 5 years, was always cast as the lead, charming, confident, and effortlessly adored. I, Anna Wells, was the background character, expected to be quiet, polite, and unremarkably helpful. Our father, Thomas Wells, was a self-made man, the founder of Timbermere Brewing, a construction company that had built half of Portland's midtown skyline. He was a towering figure, both literally and metaphorically, with a booming voice and a commanding presence. My mother died when I was 12, and from that point on, it was me, Dad, and Sebastian. Only, most of the time, it felt like just Dad and Sebastian. Sebastian was the athlete, the prom king, the business major who sailed through college while barely cracking a book. He had the look, tall, broad-shouldered, with a jawline that made people assume he knew what he was doing. But looks can lie. He used charm like a shield, deflecting responsibility and disguising incompetence. While Sebastian found himself on extended trips through Europe and Asia, funded, of course, by our father, I was pulling 80-hour weeks in the family business. I learned to read blueprints before I was legally old enough to drive. I could spot a safety hazard faster than most of our site managers. When a supplier tried to short us on a bulk concrete order, I negotiated a better rate and locked in a multi-year contract. But none of that mattered at family dinners or company parties. Everyone saw me as the bookkeeper, the assistant, the girl who liked antique dolls. Aunt Patricia once joked that my biggest contribution to Timbermere was keeping the office organized. She laughed. So did everyone else. Sebastian, meanwhile, waltzed in twice a year, made vague comments about scaling operations, and left with a new suit or watch from Dad. He never saw a job site unless it was for a photo op. He couldn't tell a 2x4 from a steel beam. And his idea of management was using buzzwords like synergy and vertical integration. Still, Dad insisted that Sebastian was the future of Timbermere.
He's got the Wells leadership gene, he'd say with a chuckle.
Ignoring the fact that I was the one staying up till midnight balancing ledgers and calling in last-minute permits. I never pushed back, not really. I believed, maybe foolishly, that one day my work would speak for itself. That Dad would finally see me not as the background support, but as the backbone. But deep down I also knew the truth. If I didn't build my place in this legacy, no one would hand it to me. So I documented everything, every contract I negotiated. Every crisis I averted, every dollar I saved the company. I kept receipts not just in files but in memory. Because one day I knew the spotlight would swing in my direction. And when it did, I wanted to be ready. Sebastian thought his name alone entitled him to the empire. But an empire built on a name without substance. That's a house of cards. And I was the one holding the wind. The lawyer's office smelled of lemon polish and old secrets. Everything about the place, from the worn leather chairs to the deep cherry wood bookshelves, screamed old money and tradition. It was exactly the kind of place where families like mine went to quietly implode. Sebastian strolled in like he owned the building, flashing his trademark grin at Mr. Harrison and clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Ready to hear how the old man divided the empire?" he said with a wink. I gave a tight smile and said nothing. The room was packed. Aunt Patricia, dabbing her dry eyes with a handkerchief that hadn't seen a real tear in years. Diane, my stepmother, rigid and regal with her pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescence. My cousin Jake, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, sipping burnt office coffee. And me, Anna, dressed simply, hair pulled back, a quiet storm waiting to strike. Mr. Harrison, an elderly man with white eyebrows that arched like question marks, cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we are here to execute the last will and testament of Mr. Thomas Wells." Sebastian sat up straighter, his grin widening. "Let's get this party started," he said. Aunt Patricia chuckled, and even Diane allowed a small smile. Mr. Harrison flipped through a thick folder. "Before we begin with the division of personal assets, I must address a matter of business ownership." Sebastian leaned forward, elbows on the table. That'd be Timbermere. Dad said he was leaving it to me. Everyone knows I was next in line. Mr. Harrison glanced at me briefly, then turned to Sebastian. Actually, your father transferred full ownership of Timbermere Brewing to Anna Wells 5 years ago. Silence. Dead, stunning silence. The grin froze on Sebastian's face. Aunt Patricia's mouth opened like a fish gasping for air. Diane blinked slowly, her jaw tightening. What? Sebastian said, voice cracking. That's not possible. Dad said I was taking over. We talked about it all the time. You talked, I said, speaking for the first time. He listened. There's a difference, Mr. Harrison continued calmly. All proper documents were filed and notarized in September of 2019. Anna Wells has been the legal owner and operator since that time, at Mr. Wells' request. The transition was kept confidential due to legal and financial sensitivities. But I'm his son, Sebastian barked. He would have told me. Perhaps he knew how you'd react, I said, letting the words settle. The room was thick with disbelief. I watched them all struggle to absorb the shift in narrative, the golden boy, dethroned, the quiet daughter in command. But she's just the bookkeeper, Sebastian muttered. I stood then, unfolding the folder I brought with me. Inside, growth charts, financial statements, signed contracts, testimonial letters. I've grown the company by 40% in 5 years, I said. Handled legal threats, secured multi-million-dollar contracts, retained key staff, and expanded into sustainable development. What exactly have you contributed? Sebastian looked like he might implode. I went to business school, he snapped. With a 2.8 GPA in a program you stretched out for half a decade, I replied. Because you kept pausing to find yourself. Mr. Harrison nodded solemnly. Your father was aware of all of this. It is why he made the decision he did. Miss Wells has been operating as sole owner since the transfer. This is not a change. This is the reality. Aunt Patricia finally found her voice. But she gets the dolls, right? Sebastian let out a strained laugh. Yeah, she gets the creepy dolls. I gave them a look that I hoped conveyed exactly how little I cared about their laughter. But inside, I was waiting for the final card my father had dealt. Mr. Harrison flipped a few more pages. As for personal assets, he said, Mr. Sebastian Wells inherits the family home. Though it carries a remaining mortgage of $300,000, he also receives Mr. Wells' personal investment portfolio, which has been partially liquidated in recent years. There were nods, murmurs. And to Miss Anna Wells, Mr. Harrison continued, goes the antique doll collection along with associated documentation and appraisals. Sebastian cackled. Seriously? You get the haunted dollhouse? Unbelievable. I remained silent. Because I remembered something Dad had whispered in the hospital. It's not just about sentiment, he had said. The dolls. Your grandmother's collection. Mr. Harrison, I asked, can you elaborate on the collection's appraisal? He smiled knowingly. Certainly. The most recent evaluation conducted by Belmore and Tate Antiques valued you could have heard a pin drop. Sebastian's laughter died in his throat. Diane looked physically ill. Aunt Patricia gasped so hard I thought she might pass out. $500,000. In dolls. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands in my lap. For years I had been treated as an afterthought. But now the math was clear. I wasn't just the bookkeeper. I was the empire. Sebastian's smirk was short-lived. I told you, he said with a sarcastic laugh. She gets the creepy dolls. At least that tracks. He thought he had won the inheritance war, at least in optics. The house, the investments, the so-called empire. But I knew better. I remembered Dad's voice, raspy and faint, during one of our last hospital visits. It's not just sentiment, he said, staring at the briefcase in the corner of the room. Your grandmother's collection, it matters, Anna. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. At the time, I had nodded, thinking he meant emotional value, family history. A reminder of the women who came before us. But as Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and pulled out a set of folded documents, my heartbeat slowed. This was it. Mr. Harrison, I said, breaking the silence. Could you elaborate on the doll collection's appraisal? He glanced at me over his spectacles, and I caught a flicker of amusement. He had been waiting for this. Certainly. The Wells Antique Doll Collection consists of 47 pieces, primarily sourced and preserved over 3 generations. Among them, several rare Jumeau dolls from the 1870s, a complete early series of Madame Alexander's storybook dolls, and 2 bisque porcelain dolls from Kamer and Reinhardt. He let the room absorb that. The last formal appraisal, conducted just a year ago, valued the entire collection at approximately $512,000. Sebastian blinked. Diane sat forward, her mouth suddenly dry. Aunt Patricia gasped audibly. "For dolls," she whispered. "Antique dolls are serious investments," Mr. Harrison continued. "Especially those with provenance. Each piece has been catalogued, insured, and maintained. Anna, I believe, helped with the documentation herself." I nodded once. As a girl, I had sat for hours beside our grandmother, polishing glass eyes, repairing tiny bonnets, and listening to her stories, how she found each doll, what it meant, what era it came from. I thought I was just humoring her. Turns out I was absorbing a legacy. Sebastian turned to me, stunned. "You knew?" I tilted my head. "I suspected. Dad told me to protect them." Now I understand why. The dolls weren't creepy trinkets. They were historical artifacts, rare, valuable. More importantly, they were symbolic. The only inheritance that had been passed through the women in our family. Grandma had started it during the Great Depression. She sold one to pay for her sister's surgery. Later, she rebuilt it slowly, one acquisition at a time. My mother added to it before she died, and now it was mine. Sebastian scoffed. "So what, you're rich now because of dolls?" "No," I said evenly. "I'm rich because I understood what they meant. Just like I understood what the company needed, while you were busy being the golden boy." The tension in the room reached a boiling point, but Mr. Harrison wasn't finished. "Each of the dolls includes detailed provenance reports and certificates of authenticity. Miss Wells also has full access to the Wells Family Trust for historical maintenance of the collection, which your father established 10 years ago." "There's a trust?" Diane asked. "A small one," Mr. Harrison confirmed. "Just under $80,000, earmarked specifically for preservation and potential museum exhibition." Sebastian looked like he was going to explode. "He left her $500,000 in dolls and a trust fund." "No," I corrected, calmly rising to my feet. "He left me a legacy." "And he left you a mortgage." I picked up the appraisal papers and tucked them into my folder. "Funny, isn't it?" I added, pausing at the door. "All those years you laughed at my dolls. And now, they're worth more than your business degree." I walked out without waiting for a response. I didn't need one. The sound of my heels on the tile floor was answer enough. The moment the word bookkeeper left Sebastian's mouth, I felt something shift in the air. It wasn't just an insult, it was a last-ditch attempt to hold on to a crumbling illusion. I could feel every eye in the room shifting toward me, waiting to see how I'd respond. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. I simply stood up, took the folder from my lap, and placed it on the glossy table with deliberate precision. The same folder I had spent the last 5 years building, hoping that one day I might need it. "Since we're talking about qualifications," I said, flipping it open, "let's go over a few things." Inside were the receipts of my life. Growth reports, revenue projections, copies of contracts, testimonials from clients, commendations from our largest vendors. 5 years of strategy, leadership, and measurable success. "This is a record of Timbermere Brewing's operations since 2019, I continued, holding up a graph. "Under my management, revenue increased by 40%, client retention improved by 25%, and operating costs decreased by 15% due to restructuring." Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and looked over the documents. "I can personally verify these numbers," he said. "I've worked with Anna throughout this period. Her financial oversight has been exceptional." Sebastian's jaw twitched. "But she doesn't have an MBA." "No," I agreed. "What I have is real-world experience." Unlike someone who took 5 years to complete a 2-year program because he kept dropping out to party in Bali. I saw the color drain from his face. That wasn't just a jab, it was truth. Cold, documented truth. "You think leadership is wearing a suit and making speeches?" I asked, stepping around the table. "Leadership is showing up at 5 a.m. to calm a client who's threatening to walk. It's knowing when a crew needs hazard pay. It is signing your name on a contract that could bankrupt you if a supplier screws up delivery. I paused at Sebastian's chair. You ever done any of that? He couldn't answer. Because he hadn't. Diane looked ready to say something, but Mr. Harrison cut in. Mr. Wells Sr. transferred the business for a reason. He knew his daughter was doing the work.
He wanted the company in capable hands. I returned to my seat, folding my hands neatly in my lap.
Sebastian tried one last desperate pivot. She manipulated him. Took advantage while he was sick. That was a mistake. I slowly turned to face him. You were in Miami when he died, Sebastian. At a conference that had more tequila than spreadsheets, I held his hand. I listened to his final instructions. You weren't there not for him, not for the business. Aunt Patricia murmured something about ungrateful children. I ignored her. I didn't steal anything, I said. I earned it. I've been earning it every day since you left the heavy lifting to someone else. Then I reached for a second folder. Thinner, but just as important. I handed it to Mr. Harrison. What's this?
He asked. Letters from our 5 top clients, I replied.
Each confirming that they chose to stay with Timbermere because of my leadership. He flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. Impressive. Sebastian was unraveling fast. But she's never even led a corporate retreat. I actually laughed. You mean those boondoggles where you rent out a ski lodge and drink wine while brainstorming synergy? Even Jake couldn't help snorting. Mr. Harrison looked around. Is there any further dispute? Silence. I could see the realization in every face around the table. They had backed the wrong horse. The Golden Boy was gold-plated at best. And just to clarify, Mr. Harrison added, Timbermere Brewing was not part of the estate today. It is a separate legal entity, privately owned by Miss Wells since 2019, the house. Investments and heirlooms are the only assets up for distribution. I stood once more, ready to leave. Oh, and Sebastian, I said, looking him in the eye. The company's not hiring. Try LinkedIn. With that, I walked out of the room. The door didn't slam behind me. It didn't need to. The silence was louder than any argument I could have made. Sebastian's downfall wasn't dramatic, it was slow, public, and humiliating. In the days following the will reading, whispers turned to headlines. Portland's business community is tight-knit, and word of the inheritance twist at Timbermere Brewing spread like wildfire. Everyone knew Sebastian had expected to be crowned king. Now they knew he'd never even been a squire. He tried to bluff his way through the fallout. Claimed it was a clerical error. Thought Adana would hand over control once the dust settled. But the dust didn't settle, it thickened. And Anna didn't hand over anything. He tried to land a job at a mid-sized competitor. They passed, then another, also a no. His resume was thin, padded with vague internships and consulting experience that meant nothing without results. And everyone knew now, Timbermere's growth had nothing to do with him. The family house, which once felt like a throne, quickly became an albatross. The $300,000 mortgage payments piled up. The upkeep bled his savings. Within 4 months, he put it on the market. He had to settle for far less than its appraised value just to offload the debt. He moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near the airport. Started working at a used car dealership, slinging SUVs, and trying to convince people he knew torque from tire pressure. The guy who once posted Instagram selfies in Santorini was now clocking in at 8 and praying for walk-ins. Meanwhile, I was everywhere. My name appeared in industry magazines. I was invited to speak at local business events. Timbermere launched its Green Development Wing, with our sustainable housing project featured on the front page of the Portland Business Journal. Our projects were booming, and so was morale. In the office, I was greeted with respect. No more side eyes, no more whispers. The workers who used to nod politely now came to me with ideas. Our suppliers trusted me. Our investors backed me. The leadership they'd ignored for years was now undeniable. And Sebastian watched from the sidelines, fading further with each headline. Some days I wondered if he had learned anything. If the fall had taught him humility, other days I didn't care. I had too much on my plate building the empire he once assumed would be handed to him. He had underestimated me. They all had. But underestimation is the best kind of revenge, because when the truth finally hits, it hits hard. And there's no getting up from a fall you didn't see coming. It was a gray Tuesday afternoon when my assistant buzzed through the intercom. Miss Wells, there's a Mr. Sebastian Wells here to see you. He says he's your brother. I didn't respond immediately. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, I could see the team on site pouring foundation for our new sustainable housing project. It was my design, my leadership, my vision. Send him in, I said. Sebastian entered looking like a man who had run out of cards to play. His tailored suits were gone, replaced by a wrinkled, button-down shirt and slumped shoulders. His swagger had deflated, leaving only a hollow shell of the golden boy who once mocked me across mahogany tables. Nice office, he said, glancing at the awards lining the wall. I didn't stand. Thanks. What can I do for you? He hesitated, shifting from foot to foot. I need a job. The words landed with a thud in the polished silence of the room. A job, I repeated. I've been looking, he said quickly. But no one's hiring, not really. Or they're not hiring me, he laughed nervously, then fell quiet. You know this business better than anyone. I figured maybe we could work something out. I looked at him, really looked. There was no arrogance left, just a man who had built his future on a foundation of assumptions and watched it all crumble. You once said I was just the bookkeeper, I said, and now you want to work for me? I didn't mean it, he replied too quickly. I was angry. Caught off guard. You know how a family is. I leaned back in my chair. I do. I know how family forgets your birthday, dismisses your work, and jokes about your inheritance being a box of creepy dolls. He had no defense. What exactly would you do here? I asked. You can't manage a site. You can't oversee contracts. You couldn't even read a blueprint when we were kids. I could learn, he said quietly. You had 30 years to start. Silence stretched between us. He looked down at the floor. You know, I continued, if you had ever shown me the smallest amount of respect, if you had treated me like an equal, we could have run this place together, built something even greater. But you never did. You never saw me. I see you now, he said. Too late. I'm sorry, he added. And for the first time, I believed him. But apology doesn't always change the outcome. We're not hiring, I said gently but firmly. And even if we were, you're not the right fit, he nodded slowly. Right, yeah, I understand. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. You're doing great things here. Dad would be proud. I met his eyes.
He already was.
And with that, Sebastian walked out of my office and out of the story he thought he owned. The next chapter was mine. Revenge doesn't always come with shouting matches or dramatic showdowns. Sometimes it arrives quietly through a title on a desk, a signature on a contract, or a brother walking out of an office he once thought would be his. For years, I was the invisible one, the afterthought. But I kept the receipts. I did the work. And when the moment came, I didn't need to scream. I simply stood in my truth. My name is Anna Wells. I run Timbermere Brewing. I own a $2.3 million company, a $500,000 doll collection, and the legacy everyone thought I didn't deserve. Guess what? I do. Don't forget to subscribe, and share if you love stories where the underestimated come out on top. More real and fictional revenge tales coming soon.